Purple Political Talk here, and today we're going to be looking at the 2020 presidential election and looking at where Donald Trump can even go to get a landslide scenario. So, last week we saw how Donald Trump's scenarios at the presidency and chances at the presidency were rapidly declining. And honestly, that kind of just freaked out a lot of Republicans across the country. But now that we start to see some of the more effects of the economy and the Tulsi rally and all these different things and Trump's reactions to all these different crazy events that are happening nationwide, we're seeing Trump gain very big amount in polls where he could have been losing before by, who knows, 10%. Maybe he's now losing by 8%, which is a big improvement considering that last week he lost a lot of support, supposedly, because we really don't know how accurate those polls are. Nonetheless, we're going to look at a landslide prediction for Donald Trump and looking where he can extend his margins to go out and win the presidency. So let's begin. And I think in his best case scenario / landslide scenario, we would see states like Oregon go down in margin levels. And honestly, some states would do that. Maybe the state of New Mexico would also go down in margin levels. But generally speaking, most states would just stay the same. And honestly, Donald Trump has a good chance of actually going out and winning by a landslide. Not because of how his support is right now, but rather how he probably would react when it comes to election season and all the things that happen during election season. And one big thing that we must acknowledge is that during election season, we see a very interesting thing that honestly, some candidates are very hit by scandals or they do a gaffe. And we know how Joe Biden has said many gaffes just during the primary and maybe during his whole career as a politician. So there is no doubt that Joe Biden will make many more gaffes during his presidential campaign, which could cost him some voters in certain key areas, which could push Donald Trump to win some of these states, whether it be by a narrow margin or by a huge margin. But a win in the Electoral College is a win. So this would be our starting mark for the Republican Party. And I think in Donald Trump's landslide scenario, we would see states like some of these states that they generally go in the likely column for the Republican Party, in the lean column for the Republican Party, go by safer margins. And what are some of these states? Well, I would say the state of maybe Alabama or South Carolina, who have been rumored to move into the likely column. Those states would be by safe margins. And honestly, some other states that could be somewhat considered Republican, those states would move in further right in the likely column, which at the end of the day helps Donald Trump and his chances at a landslide. And honestly, a landslide is pretty much the popular vote, I guess. It's important to have a balance. I mean, a landslide could be a landslide if we win all the extra states by 0.01%. But I think it's more efficient. It's more a thing that impactful on the nation if the landslide is both electorally and to the popular vote. And this would be our starting map. And we are going to look how Donald Trump could go in his best case scenario. So let's just start by filling our Democratic likely states in a best case scenario for Donald Trump. And at this point in time, I think a state like Oregon could go into the likely column, a state like Nevada and the state of Colorado. And I think it's up to these three because, listen, and the state of New Mexico as well. So with the state of Oregon, I would say in a best case scenario for Donald Trump, it goes into the likely column for Joe Biden, just for the fact that there is growing population in the state of Oregon with very conservative ideals, and there's a lot of strong growth for the Oregon GOP. And they really like Donald Trump in the rural areas. So basically in the state of Oregon, what really decides the election is the west coast of Oregon, where you have the major cities, as long as some major cities near the western part of the state. But on the eastern part of the state, you have very big and heavy Republican populations, because mostly it's rural areas. So you have them scattered, but they make up a big chunk of electorate. If Donald Trump can move these people to vote for him and get out those rural voters, maybe he could push it down to the likely column. And Nevada, Colorado, and New Mexico, I feel like, are three states that, honestly, Donald Trump doesn't have a chance at, but he could close up the margins. Instead of going like in a safe margin for the state of New Mexico, or going by 10 points in Nevada or Colorado, we could see New Mexico by 10 points and Nevada and Colorado go by 5 to 10 points. So it's a little different. Nonetheless, it could be something that we could see happen. And big notable absences from this likely column would be states like Virginia, New Hampshire, which I will get through later. Now, where does Donald Trump get his likely states in the best case scenario? In his best case scenario, I could see him winning states like Texas, Georgia, Ohio, and Iowa by likely margins, by more than 5 points, 5 to 10%. Ohio and Iowa, I would see him winning by the same margins he won in 2016. And Texas will probably be by that same margin as well. And the state of Georgia, or maybe just a little tiny bit less, but still will be in the likely column. Georgia, I could see it go by 5 points, maximum in his best case scenario, which at the end of the day is pretty good considering that Democrats are currently gaining a lot of support in the state of Georgia. So looking at where Donald Trump can expand his lead and landslide scenario, the biggest starting blocks would be Ohio, Iowa, Texas, and Georgia. As soon as you lose maybe just one of these states, a road to winning states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, or Arizona, it's completely out the window and out of the question. And as we go on to see, to get a true landslide victory, there would have to be all the rest of these electoral votes going to Donald Trump. But look, there's one big thing we must understand. This election is currently not over. So this scenario, we also be looking into how if Donald Trump keeps on closing the poll margins and keeps gaining support nationwide. And we have seen that he's been gaining support nationwide. And realistically, Joe Biden is kind of starting to come down a little bit of polls. And honestly, I think what we just saw with Joe Biden was kind of circumstances with coronavirus and things like that. But as the economy continues to recover, we're going to see extreme support for Donald Trump in certain areas of the country. Which brings me to the lean Republican states. For the lean Republican states, I would say that we would see states like Florida, states like North Carolina, and states like Wisconsin, and these three states, and maybe the state of Arizona. In Donald Trump's landslide scenario, we would see these four states going to him by 3 to 5 points. These states are going to be super close. And if we put it on a regular scenario, these states will probably be the closest of the election season. But nonetheless, these states do have a chance of going to Donald Trump by these types of margin. And if you look at the Rust Belt, realistically, Wisconsin is the most likely to go to Donald Trump. Does that mean that he has an ultimate chance of winning it? Not so much. But in a best case scenario, we can obviously see it going by lean margins. And North Carolina and Florida, they're pretty self-explanatory. Joe Biden is currently losing or narrowly winning in the state of Florida, according to my projections, which I base off of, some types of polls, generally how the different ethnic groups and different age groups and different types of voters in the state usually vote, and analyzing all these past data that we have to see that that Donald Trump is gaining some popularity among suburban Floridians in maybe even, but he's also losing some area support from the older community, and actually it's been proven that he might even grow with the African American community, but who knows. At the state of Florida, I think in a best case scenario right now for Donald Trump, I would put it around 3 to 5 points, maybe 2 or 3, but who knows. So these are all our Republican lean states, and then as we go on to our Democratic lean states, I would put states like Virginia, New Hampshire, and probably the state of Minnesota. These three states are realistically very important. And honestly, it would be a little weird calling this landslide scenarios for Donald Trump because it's not really a landslide. It's currently a best case scenario. If things continue to go like they are, we could see a scenario where he could do the same or a little bit tiny better than he did in 2016. And this is just basing it off what we have now and what we can project him to do. Who knows, maybe he does something crazy that the whole American public just goes on to like him for, and then he's kind of the hero of America. Or we could see him go completely down, and we can see this happen, but on the opposite side, where we see Joe Biden have a best election season. And realistically, states like Minnesota, Virginia, and New Hampshire will probably go to Joe Biden still, but they will go by lesser margins than expected. With the state of Virginia, I think in the best case scenario for Donald Trump, he will push out those the military vote a lot, and the suburban vote. Because remember, the state of Virginia, you have a lot of big suburbs. You have the big DC suburb, which is a heavy population areas. As well, you have the different population areas in Virginia Beach and parts of Richmond in the middle part of the state. For that reason, I think that we could see something like that happen. And Minnesota and New Hampshire, they're honestly states that have almost even population of Democrats and Republicans, but they have been leaning more and voting more Democratic over the last couple of years. But at the end of the day, we can still see states like Minnesota and New Hampshire flip. But realistically, that would be like 100% effort from the Donald Trump campaign. And I think best case scenarios and landslide scenarios, I would base it off like 75 to 90% effort. And it's a thing here that, remember, to get the results you want, you have to have very good money spending. Donald Trump has raised a lot of money for his campaign, and so has Joe Biden. But it's the way you spend your money, and I think the Trump campaign has been trying at least to spend enough money and spend it smartly. But as we go on to election season, we're also going to be seeing some of the aspects of Joe Biden's political flaws, which include public speaking, debates, and things like that. And, I mean, those things are kind of fixable, I guess, for Joe Biden, but he needs a lot of practice on that. Because remember, usually one of the biggest downturns in presidential elections is your reaction to scandals and allegations, and how you act to them, and your debates performances. Because those are the two biggest impressions the public will get to see you with. And for many reasons, that's one of the reasons Hillary Clinton lost, because she didn't know how to handle the email scandal. Or Roy Moore in Alabama in the Senate race. One of the reasons he lost was he didn't know how to handle the allegations. And we don't know if Joe Biden has many allegations or not, or many scandals are brewing, but who knows? And maybe that would be an impact, and maybe we can see this scenario grow even more for Donald Trump. So now going into our Republican tilt states, I think in a best case scenario for Donald Trump, we could see him winning in states like Pennsylvania by tilt margins, and Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District by tilt margins, Maine's 2nd Congressional District by tilt margins. And honestly, I think these two districts would actually closen up as we go and get closer to Election Day, just because of the fact that, remember, these districts are somewhat conservative. One more than the other, but with Joe Biden also being that type of conservative Democrat they like in the Northeast, in that part of the state, not the Northeast area as a general, but that northeastern part of the state of Maine, and he's just a perfect candidate for Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. I think narrowly pushing it out would be a good thing for him. And in Pennsylvania, it shouldn't be a question that Donald Trump has second best appeal out of the Rust Belt there, after the state of Wisconsin. And honestly, Donald Trump can probably pull it off with the western part of the state, with areas that are white working class areas and the coal mines and the coal workers. And those areas are some of the heavy Trump areas in the state of Pennsylvania. And unless the Democrats have outstanding, phenomenal, never seen before African American turnout, it's probably going to seem like the state of Pennsylvania will probably go to them. But Donald Trump probably has enough votes to go out, and actually he's growing with the African-American community, which is something that should be noticed. And it's not oftenly talked about because, again, it's not a big growth, but it is a growth. And just as you start taking away bases from the Democratic Party, that just kind of shows the diversification of the Republican Party. And I think we're also going to be seeing a very big amount of African-Americans being surrogates for the Donald Trump campaign. Examples: Candace Owens, Kanye West, and those people that heavily like Donald Trump and are part of that community, they can go out and get more voters. Remember, a big amount of African Americans voted for him in 2016 compared to the numbers that voted for Obama or actually Mitt Romney. So in the states of Pennsylvania and other states have heavy African American populations, especially in the urban areas, we can start seeing some of those growths for Donald Trump in those areas. And last but not least, we have the state of Michigan. But in a best case scenario, I don't see him winning yet, just because of the situation the country is in now. But if the economy continues to kind of recover, and we see very high levels of jobs and all these different growths, people in Michigan might see Donald Trump as a good candidate. Because remember, only 10 years ago, they were broke. The auto industries were broke, and all the major employers started losing jobs indirectly or directly, just because, or the factory workers lost their job directly because they couldn't make more cars. And then the people who owned the grocery store, the mall, all these different people, they started to go bankrupt just because of the fact that they were broke. And it was government that went back and fixed all that and gave them a bailout. But economy really matters in parts of the Midwest. And generally, when you think about these areas, there's one issue voters in almost every part of the United States. Just think about it. West Coast, it's mostly climate change, but it really does not matter because that's Democratic controlled. Southwest is border control. Areas of the Midwest is the economy, and everywhere else, it's different issues that affect individual states. So looking how Donald Trump has reacted to the economy and has actually done pretty good improvements to the economy, he has a good chance of containing the Midwest. And considering, there is some polls right now, and we're not talking about things that would happen right now, but rather best case scenarios as we get closer to November. And if you were basing it off of polls, I mean, you could honestly, if you say Donald Trump had a silent majority, quote unquote, he could take a lot of more of these states. But as of right now, I don't think that we should be listening too much to the polls. Polls start to become a lot more accurate when a lot of more people have their opinions already set in stone. And that's why you see exit polls be more accurate. And even day before polls or a couple days before. And honestly, those are the polls that really matter. This far out, those polls are never going to be accurate. Some of them might be, but generally they're not that accurate. And looking at it, I mean, silent majorities and silent voters really do matter. Because remember, there's a lot of people who do not like to disclose who they're voting for. And that is one of the big parts of democracy. It's supposedly silent voting. No one knows who you voted for if you don't want to tell them. And honestly, it's that type of vote that might get Donald Trump over the top. The people who are not talking about their vote. Because maybe a lot of the Democrats are very excited to vote for Joe Biden, or many Republicans are excited to vote for Donald Trump. But there is always, statistically, the people that have no opinion are usually either they don't want to say who they want to vote for, or they really do not have an opinion. Which, in 2016, we saw those no opinion voters go to Donald Trump through independent voters and whoever else was no opinion. And at the end of the day, that's really what matters. Holding independence and just getting all those people who do not have an opinion. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up. Like and subscribe and turn on post notifications to get notified when I post my next video. I hope you enjoyed this video and goodbye.